This is Matt, and we'd like to thank those of you who have joined for the investment of your time. Brian and I are going to share a little bit, and we hope that it's informative for you and provides some things to think about, specifically in the area of extranets. In terms of what we're going to cover today, we're going to go over a couple of things. One, we'll define what we mean by extranet. I'm assuming if you're here, you may have a concept of that, but I want to make sure that everyone's sort of talking off of the same page. Then we'll talk about what it means to sort of take that into the social space. Finally, Brian's going to walk through NewsGator's extranet, client and partner extranet, and talk about what the overall experience has been from a design and results perspective. And then we're going to talk about, if you're ready to take that jump yourself, you want to get into the social space and drive a deeper level of engagement with vendors or partners or clients, where do you start, and what's the right way to go about having a social extranet? That's what we're going to cover over the next 45 minutes or so, and then we want to make sure that we have time to address questions at the end. So what is an extranet? I think that there are a number of different ways that it could be defined. In the context of this conversation, we're looking at an extranet as being something that sort of sits in the middle between the standard definition of intranet sites, which is largely anonymous websites where you're engaging consumers or individuals who are not part of your organization. Also different from intranet sites where the target audience is largely employees of an organization. Extranet really sits right in the middle, and you can see in kind of the Venn diagram here that typically an extranet is an authenticated site. So users come in, they log in, they have to tell you who they are, which differentiates it from an internet site. But on the intranet, or differentiating it from the intranet, is that they're not members of your organization. So they're very often partner organizations or clients or people outside of your organization who you need to collaborate with. If we look at sort of the current state, extranets are not really a new concept. And they've been used, I think, historically for a number of different things. One of the really, really typical use cases is my favorite, the file dump. So this dates back to a lot of organizations had FTP sites. You have files that are too big to transfer back and forth practically via email. Let's transfer it via FTP. We've graduated a little bit. There are consumer kind of grade file sharing opportunities like Box.net or Dropbox or any of those kinds of things that are out there. Some organizations use platforms like SharePoint as essentially a glorified file dump. It's a place where people inside the organization and the relationship outside the organization can just go at one place to share information. The standard, maybe most common extranet scenario is individuals from organizations collaborating together on files. Another is that individuals will come together in an extranet scenario. They've authenticated, but it's really, the purpose is kind of a moderated forum. So very common scenarios for things like this are product support. We sell widgets. We need to be able to give support to registered users of those or to people who are going out and installing them or something like that. So a moderated forum where individuals can come in, ask questions of experts within the organization is another very, very common scenario that organizations deploy from an extranet perspective. The third is to provide premium content. So it's kind of the concept of an extranet in this case is a give-get, right? You provide some information about yourself as a client, as a partner, as a vendor, as a premium prospect, and the organization is going to, in turn, provide some premium content as a result of that. That's very common in research-based organizations, for example, where there's information that they don't want to make available just to an anonymous public, but in return for having some valuable marketing information published via an extranet, they can, provide additional value that's not available just on the standard website. So certainly, I think that's not comprehensive. So the file dump, the forum, the premium content, but those, in my experience, are some of the real key drivers that organizations look to extranets to be able to provide. But there's certainly been a lot of buzz around social. Certainly in the consumer space, certainly we've seen a lot more traction around social as a platform, as a collaboration platform on intranets. What about taking that and extending it to the extranet? And what special opportunities and motivations would that mean? So what would it mean if we, instead of just looking at the extranet as a file dump or as a forum or as a place to provide premium content, what would it mean if we actually made it a social platform? And why would we even consider doing that? Sort of taking a step back, there's a question of what is it that makes social solutions work? What makes a social solution different from one that's just a file dump, for example? And I think the answer to that, and this picture usually scares people when I show it, but is dialogue. You're changing the extranet from being sort of a one-way, let's talk past each other. I'm going to go put a file out there, and Brian's going to go grab it, or Brian's going to go put a file out, I'm going to grab it, into a space where we can now have a meaningful conversation about something. I think that's what we see happen in the consumer space, and that's what, to me at least, the socialization of an extranet really means. This is a screenshot of just sort of a standard activity stream. This is actually from NewsGator's software inside our organization. But you can see up at the top, Bart had a post about another hackathon coming next month. A few people like it. 11 people commented. You can see the comments happening down at the bottom. What's really happening right here is there's dialogue happening, right? Somebody started the conversation, and then a bunch of other people chimed in. And so it's that opportunity to take the extranet and turn it from a place where there's just sort of rudimentary collaboration happening and turning it into a richer dialogue-based conversation. One of the other motivations of using social technology on the extranet is that it's familiar technology to end users. So you can see that this now says, this is a statistic as of the end of last year, that there are 206.2 million internet users in the U.S. 71.2% of the U.S. web audience is on Facebook. So if we could take technology that is familiar to 71% of the audience and leverage that on the extranet, that means that it's going to be naturally intuitive for them, right? They can come in, they can collaborate in a space or in a fashion that they're accustomed to doing in their personal life and be able to extend that into a business context. I like this. 57% of people talk to people more online than they do in real life. Obviously in this context, we can either lament that and say we should really do more talking to each other in real life, or we can say that presents a business opportunity, right? That this is a way that people are accustomed to interacting with each other. How can we take and drive the engagement that we have with our vendors, our partners, our customers to a deeper level than we have today? It's also a great opportunity to get feedback, and Brian will talk a little bit more specifically about this, but I think that one of the key motivations, why would I consider embracing social on the extranet, is that it provides a forum for getting very unfiltered feedback from your audience that's difficult in other ways, or that you might have to pay a lot of money to do in other ways. So obviously you could do market research, you could do various different channels for getting the voice of your customer. But one of the ways that you could get it is via some investment in socializing the extranet platform that you have in place. This is just sort of supporting that. What you see here is a screenshot of Sears.com, and probably no one thinks of Sears.com as being, or Sears as necessarily being a cutting-edge or leading-edge organization when it comes to incorporating sort of social concepts. But this is in the consumer space, and I just wanted to point out that one of the things that they've done here, if you look at this part of the screen, is even when you go on to Sears.com, sort of the old traditional brick-and-mortar type organization, they're now including things like ratings and reviews on their consumer-based websites. So that concept of being able to get feedback and get unfiltered feedback, even if it's negative, is something that I think is pervasive now in the consumer space. We're starting to see it more in the intranet space. And I think the suggestion that we'll make here is that there's tremendous opportunity for that same type of thing in the extranet space as well. Finally, this is just a picture that illustrates people are moving past each other as well. And I think that one of the things that an extranet provides is that very often the circles of individuals who will be coming into an extranet, be it clients, be it partners, be it vendors, have something in common because they're maybe in the same vertical or they may be in the same discipline or something like that. And it's an opportunity to add value to the platform that you're providing for your relationships by providing a way for them to network with their peers. to provide relationships, so that instead of walking past each other at 90 miles an hour on the street, they're actually able to see that the person that they're walking by, so to speak, is potentially a valuable business relationship for them. So it's a way to engage directly. It's also a way, I think, to provide additional value and from an audience standpoint, increase the number of times that users come back to your extranet by increasing the networking opportunities that those individuals have. So that's sort of the intro. I think the way that we want to lead into the story about the NewsGator Extranet is to talk about what has been done in the space, to talk about what we think the potential value is of investing in social and in making an extranet platform more social. But that's all kind of theory. And NewsGator is an organization that has done that. And so I'm going to turn it over to Brian, and Brian's actually going to walk through the story of Engage, which is the NewsGator Extranet. Brian?
Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate it. Good intro, and I think you'll see a lot of the same kinds of stories and use cases that we pursued. So, as Matt said, Engage is our customer and partner extranet. It's a place that we strive to do many, many things. And on the next slide, I'll actually show you the actual use cases we were actually trying to solve. So, we had a lot of objectives when we launched our Engage platform. We wanted to help increase customer satisfaction, and we thought that it would be important for them to know what was going on, to be able to communicate in an open way, and that would help them in continuously drive satisfaction. We also wanted to build real relationships. We have lots of customers, and we like to know who people are and what's really important to them, so that we have a really good base on which to communicate. So that was our first objective. From the product side of the organization, I really wanted to get a great channel for feedback. I wanted to know what people thought of the product as it existed, and I also wanted to know where they wanted it to go. NewsGator focuses on delivering on very short cycles and staying up with consumer markets ahead of base platform investments, and so driving our roadmap based on feedback from users is critical. And we wanted to have a channel to support our customers. This is a pretty common case for extranets, as Matt mentioned, and this is a way that not only could we support our customers, but our customers could support each other. We wanted to support partners in a similar way. We have about 55, I think, registered partners, and building out that partner ecosystem, especially working in the world of SharePoint, is important. We've got a few that we've really, come to rely on here. Matt is doing a great job representing this, and we're really excited to have Proficient part of that story as well. So this is a nice opportunity to expand our way to work with partners. Similarly with supporting developers, people write code using our code, and giving them the ability to essentially understand what we're doing with the product and where they can extend it and how they can extend it is a big deal. And last two things, we want to be able to give our message out to our customer base and let them know where we're going from a company direction, and this serves as a great way to release our product out and get feedback on it before we actually give it to the general market. So all of these objectives, and in a little bit I'll cover how we do all of them. But first, on the next slide, we'll talk about what the audiences are. So we have a diverse set of people here that are interacting. We've got customers who are each in their own private community, but also accessing these public areas. We've got partners who have a private community for supporting them directly, but they're also public. They can also access the public conversation that's going on. And then we've got the NewsGator employees, and the NewsGator employees are working in all of these different communities and contributing directly, whether it's our CEO posting information out broadly to everyone, or it's me focusing on product feedback side of things, or someone from our services side focusing on adoption. We have a lot of different kinds of folks coming in, each with their own sorts of objectives. So we lay our initial goals against these audiences, and I'll show you how they all turn out as we walk through some of these stories. So around customer satisfaction, one of the things we really focused on was having a good set of core communities. Maybe a little bit hard to see, but when we launched this, we had only about a half dozen public communities, and they were very much focused around how to get the most value out of this. What were best practices? How do you get adoption? What kinds of information can people share around doing training or supporting each other? You'll see later on we added in additional communities to support other stories. What's really heartening is that, as Matt mentioned, the dialogue is really what matters here. So at the bottom of the screen, you can probably make out that there's a question here, right, which is an implementation question. It's not so much a technical question about how the product works, but more about this person is saying, hey, I've got some community kinds of deployments, and I've also got some people who want some sort of standard kinds of sites in SharePoint. How do I guide them on sort of what's the best solution, right? So this is a kind of question that our customers are encountering. And here we've got a nice answer from Rich, who's a sales engineer, who's really giving some guidance and some pointers. And you may not be able to see it, but there's actually 18 answers on this question in front of Rich's, right? So Rich's is flagged here because it was one that Lincoln thought was a good answer to that question. But having this ability to raise a question like this and carry on a conversation really helps customers see how to get the most value out of the product. And on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about how we try to build relationships with our customers. So we essentially want to find how to react and relate to our customers along the way. And so we've done a few things to have more informal ways to interact. This slide's still building out for me watching it remotely. But you can see on the left that there's essentially what we call a sphere, which is a very lightweight community called Snow Club. So we've got a bunch of folks coming out here in March for our annual customer collective. We're based in Denver, and there's fun things to do in the snow in Denver. And so we're essentially opening up a place to have a conversation around that topic. And it's helpful to understand people, on a personal basis and the kind of things they like. And we'd like to be able to help out with that. Lots of folks here know great places to go skiing. Over on the right-hand side, you can see we've also put a very small space together for people who are in the financial services space, for example, to collaborate amongst each other. Again, just an easy way for people to find and focus their conversations and to build connections, both us with them and customer to customer. Product feedback is my community, so I have a personally vested stake in this. I asked to add this after our initial launch because I wanted to have a way to interact with customers. You can see a couple of examples. The very top one is that we're using our ideation capabilities, and customers and partners are free to come in here and submit their ideas about what will make the product better. And you can see that people will chime in. They'll vote for things that they like, and they'll comment on it. So we're getting very real-time feedback around what is actually happening in the product and what people want to happen. Similarly, as we go through the process of releasing, we actually post what we call a straw man out on this community, which is what we think we're going to do in the next release cycle. And it's based on all the feedback we've gathered, but what we really want to do is get a dialogue with our customers about which of those stories will matter most to them. And so that's really important from the point of view of we ask the question and get the answer back and confirm that, yes, this has value. And we do that every 4 or 5 months, so it happens on a very frequent basis. Then as we're working on the actual product release, we try to actually show people well ahead of time what's coming. So the bottom left corner is just an example where I took a screenshot of a new capability that's part of the Spotlight module, which is a user-to-user badging capability we call Kudos. And so I wanted to give people a visual preview to say, okay, there's now a way to pick a badge and apply it to a person and say, hey, good job, and send them that message. And that's coming in the next release. And that gives people a chance to comment back and say, I like this, or you really should consider this extra case. In some of those cases, we can actually deal with that feedback and change the feature as we're developing it. Similarly, we record little screencasts of upcoming features and upload them through the video capabilities so that people can see, oh, I see how stream paging is changing, or I see how this sorting is going to change, and this will let them see it in advance and, again, give us reaction. From the customer support point of view, what's nice here is that we have a channel for customers asking questions informally in this, but we also let them actually submit tickets directly from the site. So we're trying to make one spot where everyone can actually interact and basically get the answers or get the things that they need. So if they have a formal ticket they want to open, they can open that. If they just have a question about what's the best way to do this, or I wonder, if it could do this, is there some way someone solved this use case, they can toss that into the general conversation. We also distribute our software through here. So that is a nice way for people to know that whatever they need is available to them here, and they can pull down the latest software. We'll also release beta versions out of this platform. And so basically we essentially have one-stop shopping for customers to come and get answers to their questions or get the things they need. And we try to do the same thing for partners. So we have a partner support community that's private to that partner audience. So this is a place where they can ask questions, but all of the partners have access to this. And so again, you can see very much the dialogue is what's driving the interaction. We got a question in here. Tom, who's from our professional services side, has answered his question. And this is basically a way for him to address that question. What's neat is if you look at the graphic down below, it's a little pie chart graph from what the activity is like in that community. And what you can see is actually answering is the most dominant form of activity there. That when questions get asked, you get lots of answers, and you get lots of people chiming in to refine and add on to the answers. So the advantage for us as an organization is that oftentimes we can answer a question once, and then it's going to apply to all partners here. And so it's available for all of them to see. And we carry on a similar story with developers. We have a developer support community, and in this community we have, again, this common theme of a dialogue happening, and we also have essentially snippets of code that get uploaded and documents around doing particular integrations or guidance around the API. And this is a really handy place, again, because these are pretty detailed questions to be able to focus them into one spot. It's also nice because people will contribute back sometimes. We'll get snippets from people or suggestions from people around how to solve problems, and you get some of that developer-to-developer support. Also, from the point of view of managing the team that I manage, I try not to ask our developers endless series of questions as they're trying to get things done. But they know the developer community is there. They can actually choose to get notified of all the questions that come into this community. And so you can see that of the users who are responding in this community, the folks at the top are actually folks from NewsGator, but the bottommost person is actually a developer from my team. And so Dan isn't the most prolific of answers here, but he's actually answered 17 questions, or probably those are 17 answers that he's done in this community, or contributed content 17 times. And he's done that, when it works in with his development cycle. So he knows that there's questions that are out there, and he can loop back and help out in the community. And again, leveraging his time, other people can take the value from his answers. And from a marketing point of view, this is a channel. Now we have our collective, our customer collective coming up, and marketing has a community around the collective. It serves as a place to distribute information out to people who are interested in coming. We're doing things like sharing videos of customers who were at the last one and wanted to record stories about how they were implementing and what they were doing and the kinds of things that they were getting value from. And it serves as a great way to also take information back. If there are people who want to give back information, they know that this is an audience that's paying close attention around our customers and this event. So this is a nice channel for a very specific message, again, knowing that our customers and our partners are going to be here on this site. Lastly, I mentioned that as we release the product, we actually deploy here first. So as we are essentially going through a release cycle, we get to a point where we've got a release candidate, we vet it out. We actually load this up to our Engage site now in advance of it going out to our customers. So after our beta phase and before general availability, this is a chance for us to push a set of software out there and see if there's anything that we missed along the way that might be simple changes. Also, a chance to get customers familiar with it in this environment before they take it into their test environments. And a way for us to elicit feedback as we're going through the process. So a nice step along the end of the way. And we currently are, for example, running the 2.5 version, which not everyone has deployed out in the world, and we continuously update this as we run along to essentially know that the latest and greatest is always there. You can always see what features are available in the product. So it all sounds great, right? Basically, we have a million use cases we've solved here. They're fantastic. They're all high value. Nothing but goodness. But there's some learnings here too, right? Because when we embark on something like this, first of all, you find that there are a lot of stakeholders. Or at least for us, we have a lot of stakeholders. So you can see we're touching customers, which means that marketing and sales are going to care about it, support's going to care about it, our services organization, our partner management organization. Certainly from the product side of point of view, it matters. And that's not just from the product management point of view, but the developers care about what's going out there, the QA team cares about what's going out there, and so you have a lot of people who are stakeholders. You also have people who are operating it, right? This is operated from my support team, and so basically they have essentially all a set of needs, right? And if you look at the different objectives of the different groups, you have to do some work to get alignment, right? From my perspective, if I put my product management hat on, I think of this as the best place ever to deploy out the newest and greatest of software, because it's a great way for me to get feedback and to expose it to our customer base. If you think about it from a support point of view, having a place that you're running that has thousands of users that you're going to put the newest and greatest of software on isn't always the thing that makes you most comfortable, especially if it's before it's been actually generally released. If you're, in my world, I think about every bit of feedback I can get from customers as being crucial, and I'm willing to take all sorts of feedback. If customers have things that they want to complain about or the issues that they think are not correct, they're going to put them up there, and I think that that's just fine, because our job is to continuously improve the product and deliver a lot of value and do it quickly. That's how we compete. But if you're a person who's very worried about what sort of image that can be presented, to see customers up there complaining, you have to get comfortable with that, right? You have to get comfortable that it's better to have a customer complaint or a customer issue raised and have it addressed here, and know that by being responsive, you're making that customer happier and the other customers are happier too, than to take the opinion that you're going to have a customer complaint and other customers are going to see that complaint. And this is pretty normal for something that's going to involve your customers. But the big thing about this being social is they have the ability to contribute a lot here. As we were adding in the spheres functionality, we were having a discussion about should any customer be able to make their own group, right? And what if a customer makes a group that's really not very valuable, right? Or what if a customer uploads a video that's really not very appropriate? I think you have to put yourself in the perspective of a user at that point and say, what's the user really trying to get out of this? And really, for the most part, the people who are coming here are really trying to get the most value out of it, to try to learn and to essentially to help us as well as to help themselves. And so we really haven't had any issues. There's nothing that, occasionally a customer will say, I wonder what happens if I type a 2,000 character string in and post it into the microblog box, because I don't want to test this in my own environment. And so we don't encourage our extranet as a place to test everything out. But the answer is you get a 2,000 character microblog post. And so that's, there's very little of anybody doing anything that's inappropriate. I'd say essentially none. But there are customers who see this as an opportunity to try things out and see how things work, and that's good for us. We want to get that feedback. One of the things that was central to getting this process to work for us was dividing this up into communities and specifying owners for communities. Basically, this is true in internal social computing as well, right? You need to have people who have a stake and who have a clear set of responsibilities to be able to know that you're going to have the reaction that's necessary if we got tons of questions and no one actually did anything about them, then people will go away, right? They quickly learn this is a channel that doesn't solve their problem. And so when I set up the product feedback community, I take responsibility to go through and try to make sure that I've addressed the things that are there, to deliver the content that's appropriate for that space. And by distributing that up, it means that we've got not one person responsible for this whole thing, because it's really too much interaction. Just in the last 90 days alone, I've answered 200 times on my own product feedback community, just to kind of give a feel for the pace that we have and the interaction that we have. And we're still learning a lot. I suspect as we go forward, we're going to find lots more use cases that customers really want us to pursue, and things that we'll need to add to accommodate this. But I think if you think about it from your organization, and I know Matt's going to cover next steps, one of the key things is to think about what you're trying to get out of it and who has a stake in that. And lastly, I thought I'd show you some numbers, because nothing's more exciting than a grid. So this is a way to look at how we've had activity grow throughout there. So we launched this version of the Extranet in July, actually of last year, 12 is not quite right there. But what you can see is that we didn't have a couple of these initial communities. So basically, we didn't have developers community, and we didn't have a feedback community. But you can see how in the initial number of members, we were in a couple of hundreds point of view. And then if you hop forward to February, you can see that there's a really significant growth in the membership. And if you look at even some of these communities where you essentially look at product management going from, or product feedback going from 0 to 367, it's a big jump. And the rightmost column, we're essentially sort of comparing these populations versus the number of overall active users to sort of see, of the users who are active, how do they compare with the active populations in these communities. And you can see most of these communities have really healthy populations, right? That basically most of them have a third or more of the overall active users are participating. And it's only the pretty focusing, like the feedback of the developer community, that's down at 18%, but still very, very active. And then we have just a couple more bits of results here. We create a private community for every customer, as well as a private community for partners. And then we have a few of these public communities. But of the public communities, what's nice is that basically every one of these public communities has had membership double in the last 7 months. So this is users choosing to join them. They've had double the growth. And I have one more view of numbers to kind of put this into perspective. So since it was launched, over 200% increase in active users, 100% increase in daily visitors, essentially, almost 100% visitors, 100% increase in page views, and then adding about 130 net new accounts per month. So we're adding a lot of users to this at a pretty steady pace. And the bottom chart is showing an overall graph of activity, which you can see drifts down on weekends. It's a little less busy on weekends, but it has a nice steady increase in pretty strong peaks. And so really what we're looking at is the average number of events is tripling since November. And so this is a good sign that the dialogue and the feedback that's happening here are productive for everyone. I'll turn it back over to Matt for the closing notes on the next steps.
Great. So is all that weekend activity the time that you spend on the site, Brian?
I have been known to answer a few questions on weekends.
So if the question is, we picked your interest, you want to say, look, we want to take our Extranet to another step. How do we start? How do we take and do some of the types of things that Brian shared about with what NewsGator's done on Engage? We have some some suggestions, and it's not everybody should go do this, but it's some principles that you should keep in mind. Step one is understanding your users. We heard in the NewsGator story Brian talk about very distinct audiences of customers, developers, partners, of knowing who the internal stakeholders were. But you didn't say this, Brian, but I know that part of the analysis that went into that is, what do our customers need when they come here? What do our developers need when they're coming here? How does that differ from what partners need? So understanding the perspective of the users of the extranet, I think, is really the first part of really even a decision process. Is social the right way of going about engaging these folks? So our suggestion would be able to clearly articulate who those audiences are that you're going to serve via your extranet. Step 2, be able to answer this question: why are we doing this? Sometimes we see folks get into the social space because it's cool. There's a lot going on in social. But I think that a measured approach to it is that you've got to be able to clearly articulate why it is that you're making this investment with your extranet, and what the social collaboration technology is going to be able to bring to the table. In NewsGator's case, it was, we want to be able to get earlier product feedback. We want to be able to get feedback on our product release process. We want to be able to allow developers to support one another. You know, Brian talked through some very concrete answers to the why and what's the behavior that we're trying to drive here. I think our suggestion is, if you can't answer this question, you have a little bit more thinking to do before you start embracing that with your own extranet. Step 3, make sure your culture's ready. I think, obviously, NewsGator is an organization that is full of people who are comfortable with social technology because they write it. Not every organization is ready to embrace social. And so I think one of the things that will be important is expectation setting with stakeholders, of sort of a candid analysis of, hey, are we an organization that is comfortable with informal conversations, that is comfortable with doing things in an open forum, that is comfortable with our executives jumping in and speaking unfiltered on behalf of the company. All those things are things that are cultural indicators that I think are core to success of an overall implementation. They're also things that not every organization is ready to do. So I think there's a take a hard look in the mirror kind of component to whether or not this is the right step. And then finally, start small and be prepared to grow. So one of the things, Brian, that you mentioned was that there were some communities that didn't exist when you first rolled out, right? So you chose to start with kind of a core set of engagement and then grow from there, sort of based on what the audience was telling you and the activity that you saw in the space. And I think our suggestion for anyone looking to do the same kind of thing in a social extranet is, if you can find a client or two, or a set of clients, or find a way to sort of roll this out and see how it fits in your organization's culture, see what the engagement model is with the target audiences, and be prepared to sort of evolve as your organization grows. That'll be a key part of success. So perhaps not rocket science, but I think some good, solid foundational things. Understand the users and invest in user research. Really know who those people are and what they need from your organization. Be able to answer why you're trying to do this. Make sure the culture's ready, and then start small but be prepared to grow. Are things that we would suggest organizations who are looking at investing in social on an extranet. So I think with that, we're going to go into some questions. Before I turn it back to Callie, I just wanted to ask you, Brian, I think one common scenario that you've crossed the bridge of here is that you have an extranet now that serves people who are competitors. And I think that's a very common scenario in an extranet space, and it's not a big deal when you silo your users off from one another. But you're now talking about an environment where those competitors are potentially have visibility to other activity going on. How have you sort of addressed that, and what's the feedback that you've gotten on it?
That's a great question, Matt. Again, this is one of those multi-stakeholder kinds of situations where we have, as I mentioned, I think around 55 partners. And when we bring them into an environment like this, we're letting them see all of the conversations for all of the customers. And so they're getting to see, who's using our product and who's and where they are in the process. And this is all pretty interesting information. But I think, when we look at it at the very, very high level business point of view, we have a lot of partners, and we have to have a mechanism for understanding which partner makes sense in which engagement in any case, and that's an important part of having a successful partner channel. And then we have very professional partners. I think as a partner coming in here, if you're going to engage in the public space, what you do is going to be visible to everyone. And so it would quickly become, essentially obvious if someone was, loading up poster boards of, come buy from me, in the stream. Well, a lot of social norms help to reinforce this. One of the things that companies often think about inside their organization is, if I put this stuff in, won't people lose their minds and just do irrational behavior? And the answer is actually no. It happens very, very rarely. People quickly get the idea that this is like Facebook. As you mentioned, Matt, that people are pretty familiar with these paradigms and that what you do there is visible to everyone. So by giving the partners a private space to interact with us, and by letting the partners know that they're all visible and they're interacting in the public space, this has really never been a problem for us. And so, I think a lot of credit goes to the professionalism of the partners we work with, but it's also the fact that being visible helps to really reinforce good behaviors. And that's a big power of social.
Cool. Well, Callie, I know you've been monitoring the activity on the instant messaging. Are there questions that we need to address?
Yeah, there's a few questions that we've received during the presentation, and just as a reminder, if anybody else has any additional questions, you can send them to us through the IM function. The first question is, are the activities in NewsGator over SharePoint using the same databases as the SharePoint activity feeds?
Okay, great. That's a great question. I'll take that one. So NewsGator is picking up quite a lot more information than SharePoint will pick up out of the box. When you install SharePoint 2010, it has activities that it will track for a few things. It does collect tags and ratings. Mostly it collects changes to your profile. If you've added interests or changed profile fields, it will keep track of things like if you've updated your status message on your public profile. And that's kind of the extent of where it goes in terms of the events it captures. We add a lot more functionality, and so we capture a lot of additional events. And things like microblogging or comments on microblogs or liking something or questions or answers or documents, tasks, wikis, discussions, picture uploads, and a bunch of other things are all things that are captured inside of social sites and added to the overall data that we can assess to say, here's what people are really doing. So really, adding in all of those different bits of functionality adds a lot of specific events. And then to extend it a little bit more, you can add on additional parts of social sites that add yet new kinds of events. So if you add the ideation part of social sites called Idea Stream, it adds idea events, and you can vote on those. If you add the Spotlight part, it adds badging events. If you add the video part, it adds, you might guess, video events. And the news stream part adds, as you may have already guessed well now, the news events. And so this just lets us collect a lot more information about what's going on, and that's why some of those reports you see are fairly rich.
Great. So the second question is, when will version 2.5 be available?
Excellent. Someone who's closely following our releases. So I will try to keep this short. So we released the base version of 2.5 actually at the end of January, but as I just mentioned, we have all of these modules that go along with it, and so we're scheduled to release all of the modules along with the base again right around the first week in March. Actually, just basically if everything is done on almost all the modules, we're just doing some final touches on the ideas work, and you're getting a sneak preview here by being on this webinar that we're actually going to update that release number to 2.6 just to recognize that it's the version that we're shipping with all the modules. The functionality is essentially exactly the same as what we released in the core product at the end of January, but we're adding all these new modules along with it. So you got a sneak peek into a number update, but that's the timing. And if people want to try out a beta, I have a beta actually on the product feedback site, and I will update that beta again this week.
Great. So the next two questions are around measurement. The first is, how did you measure adoption? Is there another way of measuring collaboration besides the pie chart you showed?
Great. I'll try not to take all of Matt's questions, but if you want to talk on a broad basis. So measuring adoption is a really common use case. Right? People want to know how is the software being used. So we do a few things to measure this. As I mentioned, we capture all these different kinds of activities. So we know everything that goes into the stream we know about. We know whether or not you've essentially created a microblog or answered it or commented, and all these kinds of active reporting. And when you saw those pie chart graphs, that's really what it's breaking down. It's showing these are the kinds of actions people are performing. And we have those views at a community level, have them at a global level, and we'll actually have them at an individual user level. If I go in and I want to look and see what a user's done, I've got breakdowns of their individual kinds of activity. That's actually pretty helpful from the point of view of trying to understand, especially what your power users are doing and understand, where you might, guide them to other behaviors as well. In addition, SharePoint has built-in reporting that shows you things like page views. So some companies will want to look at sort of overall page view kinds of things to see what's the broad utilization. And you notice that in my last slide there, I talked about some page view statistics going up about 100%. Those are from the base SharePoint reporting. And then the last thing that's kind of a way to measure adoption is that we use our Spotlight module, which does badging, to essentially set badges out there that are driven by behavior. So you can set a badge out there that says, I want to reward people, for example, for contributing answers to questions, or maybe multiple things. I want to reward people for uploading documents and creating wiki pages and whatever sorts of stuff you want. And so by seeing, who's earned those badges, you've got a sense of sort of the level of adoption of particular kinds of behavior you want. And we've got sort of reports that go into showing that as well.
I'd just add on to that, Brian, that I think that sort of the answer to the why question establishes kind of the success criteria from an adoption standpoint. So, in the NewsGator case, one of the reasons why was developer support. We want to be able to give our developers a forum for being able to help each other. Well, when you turn that over and you run your report and you now have 103 answers, and that's the most frequent activity that you're seeing in that community, that means, I think, that you're successful in that sort of adoption metric. So I think, there's the metrics that show sort of raw activity, but then there's also there's some inference that needs to be done that says, are we getting the behavior, are we getting the interactions that we want out of that?
Yep, definitely. Just numbers in isolation aren't anywhere near as much as sort of thinking about what the broad usage you're trying to get out of it, and look for those measurements.
Great. The second question around measurement is, how do you measure an active user?
Sure. I think every platform's got an approach for this. What we try to do to measure, to get our active user count, is actually understand which users are actually using the activity stream. So the way that this works is that wherever you want to put that activity stream web partner, you saw little snippets of it where you saw the microblogs and the comments along the way. When a user is viewing that, we'll update their last active date. Users who never view that, or users, you can actually set it up so they have to agree to terms of use before you actually take part in actually using the system. Users who never agree to those terms of use, or who never see those things, aren't counted as active. So even though they might have a profile in SharePoint, we don't think of them as an active user.
Okay. And as a follow-up to the first question, do you have any interaction or integration with SharePoint My Sites?
Sure. The way social sites gets deployed out is quite commonly to have part of it deployed on the My Sites. It's a really flexible product in that you have a bunch of web parts that you can push out to create different experiences. So on our own internal My Sites, for example, and we have our activity stream there, but we also have parts that recommend colleagues and communities and walk people through getting started and filling out their profile. And we also have parts there that show them, for example, what badges that they can earn. And on people's public profiles, we have, for example, what badges they've earned and what communities they've joined, and a view of their activity. So that's pretty common amongst our customers, that they'll deploy out some of these parts on the My Site to make them more powerful and contain more data and show more about the user, as well as doing things like we talked about, setting up communities and other places within SharePoint where they're going to use the social functionality.
Okay. The next question is, do you have any specific KPIs to measure ROI?
So I'll go from the NewsGator side. We've, over time, helped people build up an ROI assessment. So we've done some things like collect case studies to say, okay, you may see this much email reduction, and that's an interesting measurement that has value, or you may see time to answer go down, or you may see, for example, people being able to discover experts faster, which is a little bit harder to answer, but we've actually got some functionality specifically around expertise discovery. So we have a few categories that we've collected to help customers build ROI. Over the years, I would say that fewer customers have been sort of focused on having a very programmatic or driven ROI number that they're trying to achieve, given that they essentially can see a lot of the value in the use cases, but we still help those customers that are trying to figure out an ROI story.
I would think one of the areas, Brian, that we've seen customers tie it to is idea generation. So being able to tie, hey, we use the ideation capability of a social investment, and we brought these 7 ideas that have measurable business value. That's one option as well. The other, I think, specifically in the extranet scenario, is sort of your product feedback scenario. I think you could tie that back to a financial benefit of not investing in things that people don't care about, or conversely, getting a better sort of voice of the customer and not having to spend money with a market research firm or something like that to do that kind of work.
Yeah, I'm convinced it has value. It has immense value for us, for sure.
Yeah, in the collaboration space in general, and social as part of it, hard ROI numbers have been difficult to come by. That's the very short answer to that.
Great. The next question is, how do you separate user groups? So, for example, if you have a joint venture with company A and company B, but they should never realize that you work with both.
Sure. So inside of social sites, we use what we call private communities to separate out those kinds of things. I mentioned it kind of in passing along the way, but the way a private community works is that it's always controlled by SharePoint security. And so if you have access to be part of that site, then you can see the things that happen inside that private community, and you can send messages to that private community and so forth. But the rest of the audience is never seeing those items that are happening in that community or that site itself. And so that's an important part of deciding. Inside of NewsGator, for example, we have a strategy community that only the executive team is part of, because we use it as a place to collaborate that the rest of the company doesn't need to see.
Great. Next question is, what percentage of NewsGator clients are implementing or considering implementing social extranet? Any that can be disclosed?
That's a good question. I don't know the percentage off the top of my head. It's a pretty common sort of second step, I would say, amongst the audiences that we deal with. Basically, if I look at sort of the evolution of social from our perspective, most people have started internally and then they've moved to external. I know of a few projects off the top of my head, but I don't have a good percentage, and I don't know if I can disclose any of them. So I'm sorry, I can't answer in better detail on that.
I can say that from a proficient standpoint, we use NewsGator internally and are in the process of implementing it externally. So there's one.
Okay, the next question is, trying to get users to fill out their profile seems to be difficult in an organization that is slow to adapt. At what percentage complete do we finally say, well, we've gotten those that we can, and then the others will never be willing to fill it out or really get into it?
So this is a good question of sort of, what you should expect in terms of user base and adoption. So I think if you look at, for example, our Engage site, we're actually running a contest right now to get people to fill out their profiles. We actually have little web cards that actually make it step by step, and you can pick your picture and even crop it so it looks good, and still plenty of people don't fill out profiles. I think in the end, you're always going to have people who are going to look at it and say, well, what's in it for them, right? What's the value of completing a profile? What's helpful about social stuff is that you can immediately see what somebody looks like when they don't have their profile filled out. They have a little gray image, and there's really nothing there when you mouse over them and see their little mini profile card. Still, I think if the user doesn't have a valid use case that they can actually perform in the system, they don't have questions that they want to ask, they don't have communities that are interesting for them to participate in, there's not some part of their work that's accomplished by this, or some part of their avocation. So we have fun communities too internally that are part of, we have a wine tasting community, for example. If you don't find a reason for the user to be there, it's hard to imagine that they're ever going to fill out their profile because they just don't see the benefit in it, and as easy as you make it. So I think percentages are going to vary by company. In NewsGator, it's really high. It's basically 100%, but that's because we use this for how we do our work. I would guess in other companies, you're always going to have some percentage. I'll guess 10 or 20% maybe will never fill out their profile unless you give them a real use case why there's benefit for them.
I think I'll just add there, Brian, and some of this applies more toward the internal side, but I think for one thing the 80-20 rule applies. If you look in general at your social space, 80% of the activity is going to come from 20% of your most engaged users who will have fantastic profiles. And then there'll be some sort of middle of the bell curve who have some part of their maybe base profile filled out, and then to your point, some who never do. The other thing is that I would suggest that what has helped internally at organizations who have been adopting social is making filling out the profile part of an onboarding process. So as you roll it out to an existing employee base, you may never get all of them, but as new employees come on, you just make that part of what they do. You can do the same thing on an extranet, right? So as new extranet users are onboarded, that there's a process in place to encourage them, or incent them at least, to fill out their profile. And I think that's one way of getting that number higher.
Great. I know we're running short on time, but there's 2 more questions that have come in. The first is, technically, do you have one user profile store containing all your internal and external users, or do you have multiple stores?
I've seen companies implement in both ways. We, for our purposes, are actually doing 2 separate instances between our internal and our extranet. And this is a relatively interesting technical question when you get down to the details. But I've seen both implementations. We're using separate ones.
Great. And the last question is, in the extranet scenario, do you have information on consolidation of intranet SharePoint profiles and extranet or external profiles?
I'm going to take my best shot at this. I may not be getting the exact question, but basically, yeah, it looks like maybe we just answered that with the other question. I will say that there is an interesting story about getting profile data from outside of your company to help out. One of the questions that has come up from time to time is, why can't I just grab my LinkedIn stuff and bring it in here? And I think it's a neat use case. It really comes down to terms of use actually more than anything about that data. But yes, consolidation of profiles is a good thing. Fundamentally, why we build on top of SharePoint instead of building yet another completely separate profile system.
Great. Okay, looks like we're right at 2 p.m. Central, so I'd like to go ahead and wrap up today's webinar. I want to invite each of you to join us on our third webinar in the 3-part series. It's on March 7th, and it's on governance and security. In addition to that, we will be sending out a link with the recording and PowerPoint slides to this presentation, so keep an eye out for that. And I'd like to thank Matt and Brian for the great presentation today, and everybody for joining us. And you'll see Matt and Brian's contact information should you have any additional questions. Feel free to reach out. So thank you and have a great day.